Hi, my name is Bailey,
Hi, I'm Kalia.
and today we're going to be asking each other important questions that we came up with when we were reading each other's papers.
Okay, so Bailey, I have some questions for you. So, what do you think Sher meant by depersonalization, and why do you think that this is a phenomena that perpetuates gender violence?
So I think like in today's society, we're really big on like strictly physical, unemotional relationships.
Mm-hmm.
So like hookup culture and like with like Tinder and social media and stuff like that. So like society views women as objects just for men's sexual gratification
Right.
without taking into account women's needs and wants.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like placing men's pleasure over women and their autonomy and things like that. So like the commercialization of sex and the objectification of women leads to like depersonalized and desensitized relationships because like the way men view women, it's not an equal like relationship basically. Yeah.
Okay. And so, how do you think that the gender binary informs like who the perpetrator is and who the victim is?
So I think the way femininity is looked at, we're always seen as the victim, and then like with masculinity, it's rooted in sexual terrorism and sexual violence.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, speaking of masculinity, what does Sher say about the different formations of masculinity?
So men enact and personify different forms of masculinity. So when I was reading the Kimmel article,
it's the Kimmel article. Sorry, yeah.
I was thinking about it's called marginalized masculinity. So like men as a group have power, but individually there's stratification in the power that men have between each other.
Right.
So like men of color have gender privilege, but they don't have race or class privilege.
Mm-hmm.
So this could like lead to violence. For example, like black men enacting and engaging with hypermasculinity.
Right.
Because
they want to like reassert the power that they lost from. Okay.
Yeah. So like intra racial violence between black men and black women, or men of color and women of color.
So, okay. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Thank you.
Okay. So Kalia, why do you think it's important to analyze the ways in which institutions perpetuate gender violence?
Okay, so in my paper, I spoke about Marx and Engels' theory of like a superstructure and how we're all kind of interpolated through these like major institutions like law, government, education, religion. So I think that in order to like analyze the ubiquitous nature of gender violence, we have to think about how like this superstructure informs the ways we interact with each other. So yeah.
Can you elaborate on the shift in how society views sex?
Yeah. So according to Shore, sex has been both modernized and scientized, meaning now people view sex as something that is like a biological need beyond a tool for procreation. So men have internalized that and feel that like they need sex to be healthy, and so sex for them is something that they do to women, and sex for women is something that they provide for men.
So like would an example of that be an incel?
Yeah, because incels believe, or like incels identify as incels because they believe that there's this deficiency because they're not having sex with women, and women are, and so in turn they hate women because they believe that women are supposed to provide this like nourishment for their beings, and since they're not, they call themselves incels. So yeah.
I remember watching this Law and Order episode, and it was like an incel group, and they were like killing women because women were turning them down.
Yeah. Also, like, there is a connection between mass murder and gender violence, or like incels, because I think a lot of these like young men who shoot up schools and public places, a lot of them identify as incels. Yeah. Which is like an interesting connection.
Yeah, and I remember like in the episode, the like group was saying like no actually means yes and stuff like that, and like the way they view sex, it was more so like something you do to a woman, not something you do with a woman.
Yeah. Right.
So how can the unequal distribution of resources lead to gender violence?
So both Kimmel and Schur talk about the feminization of poverty, and other scholars, but they talk about the feminization of poverty and how most people who are below like the poverty line in the US are women. And so I think that this like stratification of like capital and resources, I think exposes women to violence, because men believe that, or men know and are aware that they have this like economic power over women, and so women can thus like be sexually coerced because they know that they have to rely on men for these resources. And so an example would be like sex workers. Sex workers are kind of exposed to an environment of heightened gender violence, because these men know that they are like, that their income is, based on this like interaction that they're having with them. So
yeah, you bringing up sex workers made me think about like the sexual terrorism reading, and how like in regular terrorism, the victim or the terrorist is always seen as like the perpetrator and like the bad one, but like in sexual terrorism it's always like victim blaming. And so like with sex workers it's kind of like, well, you do this for a living, so you're opening yourself up to violence, right? Like, you should expect it almost, right? And then like with like the way the system and stuff like that is set up, typically when a woman tries to press charges and things like that, like it's not taken seriously and stuff like that. So.
Yeah. Okay. So now I have questions for you. So what do you think Schur meant by depersonalization, and why do you think that this phenomena is one that perpetuates gender violence?
Okay, I'm gonna cut it right there. I can